Hi everyone, and welcome to Neighbor to Neighbor's first donor call / webinar. It's going to be on our environmental justice program. I'm Kellen Farnham, the development director at Neighbor to Neighbor. And I want to first thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. We're deeply grateful to all of you, to all of our supporters who make our organizing work possible and who join us on the path to building a more just world. We like to think of this as one of the ways to join us along that path. We envision our donor calls as an opportunity to dive more deeply into the issues that you all care about and to show how we're thinking about the work and how we're doing the work. We'll make a recording of this video available on our website to give other folks access to it and to be available as a resource in case you wanted to refer to it in the future. As stated in the invitation, we'll discuss the ins and outs of our EJ program, that's our environmental justice program, how it shows up locally in our work, what some of the obstacles are, and what some of the hopes are. So with that overview, I'll let Andrea introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Andrea Nemicha, the Environmental and Climate Justice Director and Program Director with Neighbor to Neighbor. And before we begin the webinar, I just want all of us to come in thinking of environment, not in the conventional way that we usually do as the trees and the birds and the outside environment, but rather thinking of environment as where we live, play, and work. And these are the bases of our livelihoods. And there's a great quote that I'm sure many of you have heard, which is, if you breathe air, and most humans that I know breathe air, then I consider you an environmentalist. So we're just going to do a short introduction of the Neighbor to Neighbor staff members that are on this webinar. And so again, I'm Andrea Nemicha, the Climate Justice and Program Director with Neighbor to Neighbor. And I'll pass it on to Zuma to introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Zuma Rivera. I am the Springfield organizer. I've been with Neighbor to Neighbor for 4 years now. Recently, last year, I had the ability to get on staff, which I'm really excited about. So yeah, I can't wait till my segment comes. And so I'll see you then.
Awesome, thank you, Zuma.
Thank you.
And all of you heard Kellen Farnham, who is our development director with Neighbor to Neighbor. So to start us all off, I just wanted to give some updates on where our environmental justice work is going and where it has been. So I'm gonna kind of give it to you in 2 levels, state and local. So first with the state work, our environmental work is working with our community partners, specifically with the Green Justice Coalition, to push forward 2 bills, which are the Solar Access for All that Neighbor to Neighbor is heading, as well as the Environmental Justice Act that our partner Alternatives for Community and Environment, ACE, is heading. So Solar Access for All would allow for community solar projects in the communities that Neighbor to Neighbor organizes. And those communities are usually low-income communities, communities of color, and environmental justice communities as designated by the Environmental Protection Agency. And so Solar Access for All would allow for community solar projects to occur in our communities and give us renewable energy that we haven't had the chance to really receive. And the second is the Environmental Justice Act, which would allow for deeper, more stringent restrictions around future coal plants, biomass plants, et cetera, that want to come into those communities, our communities of color and low-income communities, and further pollute. And so that act will give us more protections to keep polluters out so that our communities are not overburdened. On the local level, Neighbor to Neighbor has really been tackling the environmental injustice, environmental racism, and climate change problem in a different way. We are taking the step to create an intersectional movement in our campaigns that bring various issues together, because we know that climate and environmental injustice is not the only thing that our communities are facing on the day-to-day. So in the upcoming months, we will be hosting 2 environmental justice tours in Lynn and Western Mass. And the aspect of these environmental justice tours is to really do base building for our neighbor-to-neighbor community, as well as to highlight the environmental injustices that are happening in our communities. So for example, Zuma Lee will be talking soon about the Herena School and how that school has had serious flooding and mold. So for example, that would be something that we would have an environmental justice tour on. And lastly, we have been going door to door in our communities to talk with our neighbors about the issues that they're facing. Again, we know that environmental justice is not just one thing. Our communities are battling a lot of injustices on all fronts. And so these discussions that we are having with our community have been crucial to us and the way we organize, because we believe in a bottom-up organizing model in which the community paves the way for our liberation. And so, as you all may have seen, we had our Let Us Breathe action yesterday on International Workers' Day that brings in the intersecting crises of racism, climate change, workers' rights, and just our ability to live and breathe freely in this world. And also we have been conducting surveys, or rather discussions with our community members about the environmental justice impacts that they're facing in their own communities, as well as other inequalities that they're facing in their communities, so that we can really start building that intersectional movement. So our take on environmental justice is, again, very different from what we are used to. And so here at Neighbor to Neighbor, we're really trying to shift away from climate justice and environmental justice, but rather to environmental racism. So as many of you may know, climate justice is very abstract. When the movement really first started building momentum in 2007, it was really centered around the CO2 parts per million, the ice caps melting, the polar bears dying, the rising sea levels, the fires, the hurricanes. I can go on and on. And sometimes within that narrative, we have forgotten about the people that are affected by those climate change disasters that are happening every day. And for example, Hurricane Maria that completely destructed Puerto Rico is an example of that everyday crisis that those frontline communities are facing. And so environmental justice and environmental racism allows us here at Neighbor to Neighbor to broaden the scope. It allows us to bring the livelihoods of people into the fight, and not just the environment that we conventionally think of as the trees, but rather really bringing in the people and having them lead this movement. So we're going even deeper and redefining environment as where we work, live, and play, which brings this issue down to a more localized level, which is the heart of how Neighbor to Neighbor does its organizing. We do the statewide work, but it's really the local level work that we're doing in Lynn, Springfield, and Holyoke that brings us to our liberation. And it's the local communities that we want to drive this environmental justice program and what it means for us to have environmental justice, what that even means and how that's modeled in our communities. So I'm going to introduce Zulma and have her share her story about the fight around the Herena School campaign in Springfield.
Hi, I'm not sure if you guys can see me. The video is a little dim, but so again, my name is Zulma Rivera, and I live in the poorest district of the state of Massachusetts, which is the north end of Springfield, Mass. For some time now, we've been working on the Herena School, which is a school that is very complex in the design, where the design has a highway and a railroad track that divides, that sits on top of these tunnels that we are currently working on. The school is divided into 3 sections, whereas the 2 tunnels and then the main mall area, the centerpiece, is where the children go to school at. Over the years, the use of the school has been changed due to floodings. There's been 3 major floodings in the school. There's some pumps that go under the school that pump out the water from one side of the city to the other side where there's a river, because we live in a valley, and so basically all the water is coming down toward the Harena school. And they've done a good job to pump the schools, but over the years, we don't know if it's the drainage or what it is, but after it's been drained from the leakage, when it rains, there is leakage coming into these tunnels. And over years, what's happening is it's become black mold. And there's puddles in the tunnels where the kids have to come through, every day to get to and from the different areas of the community, because it's divided in half because of these railroads and highways. So even years of patching up the work, we still haven't come down to the core reason as to why the Harena school isn't fixed. And what's happened over the years is that all the community rooms that are in the tunnels have now been condemned. And kids are still walking through these long tunnels to get from one end of the city or one end of the community to the other, like I said. At some point when I was going to this school offered, it was a community school. So it offered, home economics after school, basketball. It offered ESL classes for people that needed to learn English. It had a library. It was a humongous library. None of that is available anymore. It looks like the school is just like a doomsday. And so being that it's in the poorest district, we don't have a community center. We don't have anywhere for the kids to really do their after school activities. And so we asked the city what's going on with it, and of course there's a pointing of the fingers, and so we started organizing around it. And at this point, we are basically at the point where we're bringing parents in so that we can put pressure on the state to fix the areas that they need to fix, so that the city can go in there and fix their part, which is the tunnel. It has the highway sitting over it, and so right under the highway there is a gap that needs to be fixed. And so then once that gap is fixed, then the school can go in there and hopefully fix these leakage that they have. But for years, and what's happening is that the kids in there have high rates of asthma, and there's no real conclusion as to or data that the school is saying that the mold is responsible for it. But we all know, like, come on, like, if you have black mold and your kids are walking through it, it's just unhealthy or safe. And our community, unfortunately, they've been living under these conditions for so long that they seem to not know any better. And which is sad to say, and that's why the organizing that we do is so important, where we educate them on what's right and what's wrong, and to empower them that they deserve better. And because they're in the poorest district of the state of Massachusetts, this should not be happening to them. They should not be walking in these conditions, and their kids should be able to have a safe and healthy school, as well as the community have a safe haven, so that when they want to develop these new skills or cultivate new skills from these areas, we can provide that as a community, and we don't have that right now. And so, that's Harena in a nutshell. And so we continue to fight it. We're at the point where parents are coming in this Wednesday to get the update and push forward with it. And so hopefully we can get it fixed for good.
Thank you, Zuma. And I think that school campaign really highlights a lot of the issues that our communities, like in Springfield and Holyoke and Lynn, are facing. Springfield and Holyoke have the highest rates of asthma. And I'm pretty sure their levels are at 23%, which is more than double the state average of 10%. And as Zulma was talking about, the Hidena School sits right beside a major highway. So it's not only the black mold that she was talking about that's really affecting these children, but it's also all of that fuel that's coming off of the cars that are also affecting their breath and their ability to breathe. So thank you, Zulma, for speaking about the Hidena School. I want to shift this into some of the obstacles that Neighbor to Neighbor has had with our environmental justice and our environmental racism work. So one of the major obstacles or challenges in this work is Neighbor to Neighbor is really trying to start building the new, which is thinking beyond the energy efficiency and the policy and thinking about how, if we go beyond all of those, what would it look like for us, for example, to have ownership over the renewable energies, right? And not have it be still controlled by utilities. And so that has been an obstacle, but also really interesting to be navigating because we are still mindful that the state hasn't completely made that shift. So we are still engaging in working towards clean energy policies, as I mentioned before, with our Solar Access for All bill and our environmental justice bill. But we also know that while we are doing the policy, we also have to be doing the community building and thinking beyond just those policies. So we're really trying to bring about and create this environmental justice movement that truly centers and brings the livelihood of people into this fight. And talking about how climate change is affecting us on the ground as people. The dominant narrative really highlights how our activities of burning fossil fuels and consistently driving, et cetera, is impacting more of the broader world. And we see that in how people talk about the rising sea levels and the rising temperature of the world. And then sometimes we really do forget about the people who are most impacted by those everyday hurricanes and those everyday fires. And so at Neighbor to Neighbor, as we think of this work on the state level and federal level of the policy, and even now as the global scale, when we talk about the weather patterns, we must also take that step back and think of this work on the local and human level too, and what it means for our communities in Lynn, Springfield, and Holyoke to engage in the work and not engage in it as our way to combat climate change, which we are doing, but also as a way for our communities to live and continue to live and have our place and not have the hurricanes destroy all of those things. So we're really juggling and doing both simultaneously and working with our communities on how we can start to really incorporate our framework, which is the Just Transition framework of what it would mean for us to have locally owned renewable energy, et cetera, into this work as well. So what makes us unique and able to address the problem of environmental racism and climate change is really our structure and model here at Neighbor to Neighbor. So the fact that we have 3 chapters across the state that are in communities that people usually remember. So we have a chapter in Lynn, Springfield, and Holyoke. So I'm in the State House a lot and hearing about various bills that are going forward, whether it's carbon tax or RPS bills, et cetera. And sometimes it feels like we think of Massachusetts right until Worcester, and then the rest of the state we kind of forget about. So it's really amazing that Neighbor to Neighbor has these 2 chapters in Western Mass to really have us thinking about what it means for us to engage in environmental justice work at a state level. So we're going beyond that like Worcester cutoff and really working with our communities in Springfield and Holyoke to bring about that change. And also, we are so deeply rooted in our communities. For example, like Zuma is the chapter organizer in Springfield, and she lives in Springfield. So it's not only that she's organizing her community and her neighbors, but she's also one of those frontline community members that are feeling what's happening. And so that's really amazing when we do our local work, because it allows us to really be side-by-side partners with our neighbors, and having us think collectively about what it means for us to engage in the work and what our end goal and vision is of a better world. And so we started this webinar with those two quotes of one, thinking of environment as where we live, play, and work. And secondly, that if you breathe air, then you are indeed an environmentalist. And so one of the major things that we do at Neighbor to Neighbor is we are building this intersectional movement. And what intersectionality means to us is that we aren't only doing environmental justice work, but we also know, again, that our communities are battling a lot of injustices on the day-to-day. And so just as how we look at ourselves as multifaceted, whether we are like a Black woman, adult, middle class, or a white male and poor, whatever it may be, that's also how we are thinking about our movement. And so we're really placing that intersectional lens, not only on ourselves and how we do the work, but also on our issues and our campaigns. And so on the surface, for example, we have a huge housing campaign in Lynn, in which Lynn has been experiencing a lot of development, and that development of the luxury apartments is really pushing out the local community. So there's a lot of gentrification happening in that community. And so as we see the housing campaign that we're doing in Lynn as our fight for affordable housing and as for a fight to remain in our place, we're also thinking about that campaign in an intersectional way so that we can bring the community and have the community be able to plug in various ways, and also to attack the problem in various different ways. So now, as we place this intersectional lens on it, we're not only fighting for affordable housing, but we're also fighting for economic justice in our rent hikes and stopping those rent hikes. And we're also fighting for environmentally friendly housing, so housing that aren't in floodplains or near diesel fuel truck stations or near landfills. And then we are also fighting for racial justice and fighting for the ability for us to keep our social circles around, to keep our place in that community that we've had for decades. And so when we think about the environmental movement here at Neighbor to Neighbor, we know that we're not only just working on environment, that our people in our community are so intersectional that the way to fight environmental justice is to fight all the issues simultaneously. And so I will just close with this quotation, which is by Eduardo Galeano, who is a Uruguayan writer and journalist. And he writes, "The rights of human beings and the rights of nature are two names of the same dignity."
Thank you, Andrea. Well, we made really good time, and it's great we have plenty of time for questions, and we do want this to be a discussion, so I'm happy about that. I think the way we're going to attempt this, because it is somewhat of an experiment with a lot of folks on here, is unmute everyone, and if someone wants to talk, just unmute your mic, and then mute it when you're done, and just direct the question towards Andrea or Sulma. Sulma, again, worked on the Harana School campaign, and Andrea is kind of working more broadly on our environmental justice work. So if you don't have any questions, I definitely do, but I'll open it up to everyone right now. And yeah, the mute button's at the bottom left corner of your screen. and so is the video button if you want to show your video. So I'll unmute everyone now. And yeah, if you aren't ready to speak, just go ahead and mute your mic. But if you do have a question, feel free to please ask.
Hi, I'm Hannah Brandis.
Hi.
Can
Hi.
I offer a question? So, first of all, thank you very much for doing this. I think the orders. And I really appreciated both of the presentations. It's really good to
Sorry, you're breaking up a little bit, Hannah.
Okay. Should I repeat what I said? Okay. I said it's really good to hear both the very specific grounded issues around the school and also the conceptual way you're thinking about climate justice and the intersections with the other issues. So I appreciated the presentation. Am I coming in clear?
Yes.
Okay. My question has to do with, I guess the question is, do you see Neighbor to Neighbor as having the power that I see it has when it comes to environmental work in the legislature, because you have, unlike a lot of the grass tops groups, Western Mass residential participation and grassroots organizing? I see it, Neighbor to Neighbor, as having real clout when it comes to influencing legislation when teaming up with other organizations. And I'm wondering how you hold that.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree that we definitely have a lot of power in the ability that we are really across the state, and most specifically that we are in Western Mass. And so an example of how we have been doing that work and really influencing the way that the state of Massachusetts thinks about climate change and environmental injustice is through the energy efficiency program that we have here in Massachusetts. It's called Mass Saves. And for example, Neighbor to Neighbor is in a coalition with Green Justice Coalition. And so our work with Mass Saves has been really integral, because even our coalition partners have been looking for a Neighbor to Neighbor to really bring in the voice of the Western Mass folks. So we did a study this year of the Mass Saves program, and we found that overwhelmingly, this program has really done well in the Boston and Metro West, North Shore, South Massachusetts areas of doing the energy audits in people's homes and changing the light bulbs and all of those things. But there was just no data or outreach to communities that were beyond Worcester. And one of the things that Neighbor to Neighbor was able to do is push the Council of Mass Energy to have listening sessions in Springfield and in Western Mass, so that our communities could finally have a say in how this program works. And so that's just an example of how like our ability to be across the state is really moving this environmental and climate change legislation and work in the state. Because a lot of the times, if it isn't for the voices that we have in Springfield and Holyoke, a lot of legislation would go on thinking that we are like a state that's split in half in Worcester. And so it's really a great opportunity for Neighbor to Neighbor to engage in this work and also have people really listen to our voices, knowing that we have these two chapters that have a say in how things go. Yeah, so that's just an example of the power that we have and hold in being across the state and multi-issue. 。
Thank you.
Thank you. And also, if anyone wants to ask questions using the chat window, that would be best. I know dealing with the logistics of the audio and video is kind of tough. So if you can add your questions to the chat window, that'd be best. If not, if you're having trouble with that, again, just feel free to unmute your mic and ask a question.
Yes, so I see that Sarita from the Public Health Institute is asking for that report on mass save. So I can definitely send that out to you.
I have a question for Andrea, and Soma, you could chime in on this too, since I know you've had a lot of experience with the Harena School campaign. What type of campaigns, both local and potentially statewide, do you envision for the future? I know we've done some of the surveys in the community, but what are some of the campaigns you envision?
So here, from canvassing from last year on the grassroots level, a lot of people are really interested in housing and how housing is working against them right now. And so the gentrification that's happening in Springfield, the rent increase versus, how much income they're receiving. And so I would like to see, not like, I'm almost guaranteeing that we should be moving into that sector, because that's really impacting everyone. And so the housing market is big, and also the Medicare for All is another big one that are big conversations that we're having here at the grassroots level. And I can see us being able to move our people to make some change in that area as well.
Thank you. And Andrea, can you speak to how the environmental and climate justice work might intersect with some of those potential campaigns?
Yes, so first with the housing, a lot of the housing campaign and the combating of gentrification isn't only just our fight for affordable housing, but it's also a fight for good and environmentally sound affordable housing, right? So when I was talking about the campaign in Lynn that is asking for inclusionary zoning, that campaign isn't only for us to maintain our space and to have affordable housing, but it also means that when we're asking for affordable housing, it doesn't mean to just put us by a landfill or put us in a flood zone or put us by a diesel truck company, right? It's affordable housing that's asking for us to be in a community where we are not overburdened and where we have clean air and clean drinking water. So that's where the environmental aspect comes in with the housing and the gentrification work. And just two other campaigns that I can also think of off the top of my head that are really emerging and have been happening in the state is the pipeline work. So there are many pipelines that are proposed in the state of Massachusetts. There was one that was proposed in the Back Bay area of Boston, another one that is proposed in the Otis State Forest out in Pittsfield, and there is another one that is proposed in the Holyoke, Agawam, and West Springfield areas. And so the pipeline work is also crucial work that we need to be doing, because although Massachusetts really prides itself on being clean energy and we are the leaders paving the way, we still also have to combat, again, that pipeline stuff. And so the pipeline that is proposed in one of our chapters in Holyoke is a pipeline that primarily is for the basis of bringing gas to Northampton and East Hampton, which are predominantly white and pretty wealthy communities. And so the pipeline is going to harm those communities in Holyoke that, again, have the highest asthma rates, et cetera, et cetera. So the pipeline work is work we can never forget that we're doing, and that we always still have to continuously combat. And the other emerging work that's happening in the state of Massachusetts is also the problem around transportation. And that is something that we at Neighbor to Neighbor have been talking about. And so with transportation, there have been a lot of discussions about cutting public transit in Holyoke and Springfield and in Worcester, which means shorter bus routes or no bus routes at all, increase in fares potentially, and that really impacts our low-income people that don't have access to their own vehicles and really need to rely on public transit. And so the transportation is really tricky because yes, the amount that we all drive is really affecting like the climate change crisis, but it's also not, but it doesn't mean that we have to deny people of public transit, right? But there are other ways that we can really combat that climate change crisis by having more funding for electric buses that can bring our communities to where they need to be. So transit is definitely another emerging campaign and emerging topic that Neighbor to Neighbor is wanting to engage in, as well as the housing that Zulma talked about.
Thank you, Andrea, for that overview. Yeah, I know there's a lot going on. Those are exciting campaigns, though, and it's helpful to have the lens and the framework of the environmental justice, environmental racism that you're talking about. Let's see, Jim, I saw your video turn on. Do you have a question?
No, my thing is muted. No, I'm just delighted. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm just delighted that Neighbor to Neighbor is moving in this area. Neighbor to Neighbor has a way of being out front on everything that's important. So I'm just delighted to just catch up with what's going on and you know what's being programmed. So I'm just happy to listen.
Well, thank you. And you know, we really try to build relationships with all of our supporters, and I think that's what helps us stay in the front. Is having such a broad network and diverse network of folks who know the work, from different perspectives, and just really trying to bring everyone together. So thank you again for joining us. I just wanted to open up if anyone else, I think there might be a question here from Michael Luguidisi. See, in respect to the mold issues in the schools, Michael's asking how specifically people are not from the community and new to Neighbor to Neighbor can help. So if people are unaware of this issue of like toxic mold in schools, what's a way for one of our supporters to talk to other folks about it, tell them about the issue, and kind of get them to get involved by supporting Neighbor to Neighbor?
So right now we're in the process of getting the parents involved just so that it becomes like a real diverse roundtable. As soon as, and again, the way we organize is from the ground up. If you want to know, if you want to be invited, I'll be more than happy to bring you to a roundtable so you can get directly involved. I definitely do not push anyone away. The more the merrier. However, we can keep you updated with any as our progress, and the days that we need more bodies to come support us or maybe any professional assistance, I will be more than happy to, plug you in so that we could all work together on this.
Thanks, Soma. Here we go. We have time for just a couple more questions. This is from Adrian Salazar. Asking the Solar Access for All campaign sounds exciting. And asking is Intuit engaged in work to advocate for investments in renewable energy, setting the target for 100% renewable energy in the state, or any of the work on the state carbon taxes that have been proposed?
Yes. Yes, we are engaging in a lot of the policy work. So the two bills that I mentioned are ones that are deeply rooted and that we feel affect our communities the most, which is the Solar Access for All and the Environmental Justice Act. So recently, back in April, I believe, or maybe it was the end of March. The timeline is a little fuzzy, but back in April, the Senate came out with a gigantic bill called the Clean Energy Omnibus Bill. And so that clean energy bill really included a lot of clean energy and environmental justice and climate change bills into the state legislature. And among some of those bills were the Solar Access for All, our Environmental Justice Act, 100% renewable energy for the state, an RPS bill, which is the Renewable Portfolio Standard, increasing the net metering cap, declining pipeline taxes, or just new pipeline infrastructure altogether. And it did include a carbon tax. And so we kind of have two carbon tax that are in the playing field right now. So one is a carbon neutral tax, which is just everybody gets taxed and there is no revenue that comes from it. And then there is a carbon tax that does generate revenue. And so ideally that revenue would be put into a bank that would then be allocated for us to do more climate justice and environmental justice work in the state. So right now, that is the big bill that is in the State House that has to do with clean energy. And we are really pushing for a lot of those bills, especially the solar access, the EJ, the RPS, the 100% renewables, and the no pipeline tax or no more pipeline infrastructure in the state. Those are the ones that we feel are the most core to the communities that we organize in at Neighbor to Neighbor. And so we will definitely update you all on where that huge omnibus bill is. But right now it's in the Senate Ways and Means Committee. And hopefully that will be reported out soon, but I'm pretty sure that they are going through the bill and trying to really create a budget if any of those things need a budget. So we will definitely update you when it gets reported out. The word on the street is that the Senate is really eager to do more work on climate change and environmental justice in the state of Massachusetts. So we're hoping that that bill gets reported out favorably and then it goes to the House.
Thank you. Sometimes it's hard to follow the trajectory of policy, but that was clear, so thank you. I think we have time for one more question, unless someone else has another quick one, but it's an exciting one. Andrea, I know you like this one. From David Jenkins. Are there partners in Massachusetts or national networks that we're working with as we make the shift to center environmental justice / just transition? And speaking of just transition, we did include a resource on it in the invitation, which is really fantastic. So if anyone missed that, you could check that email or ask one of us and we'll forward it to you.
Yes, David, we have a whole slew of partners. So for here in Massachusetts, with the work around creating a regenerative economy and just transition, and really shifting us from this idea of an extractive economy, which is exploiting the lands through burning of the fossil fuels, exploiting people's labor in order to make the rich richer. And so Neighbor to Neighbor is really trying to move into the regenerative economy, which is having renewable energy, having cooperatives and locally owned energy for the purpose of creating a solidarity world, and a world where all of us really have equity. And so our partners here in Massachusetts is the Solidarity Economy Initiative, SEI, that Neighbor to Neighbor is a part of. And so that coalition table are really starting to think about what it means for Massachusetts to start building the solidarity economy in our own local communities, as in Lynn, Springfield, and Holyoke, but also across the state. So many of you have probably heard of some cooperatives like the Ujima Project or Wellspring. And so we are working with people that have already kind of started with a cooperative ball and working with them to figure out how we can do a just transition here in Massachusetts. And as for our national partners, so we are part of we are partnered with one really large organization called the People's Action Institute. And with them, we are, yeah, Zuma has on their shirt. That's awesome. So with People's Action, they're really a great help for us when it comes to our political education and how to do our organizing better. But also People's Action has many different avenues that our local work and our members can tap into. So for example, they have a campaign on housing that their affiliates, like Neighbor to Neighbors, an affiliate of People's Action, can join in. And then there's another campaign called the People and Planet campaign, People and Planet First. And that campaign is really the driver of how do we think about energy democracy and a just transition in the energy sector on a national scale. So we have the Massachusetts table, and then we have the national. And lastly, a really exciting conference that I had the pleasure of going to in February was the Just Transition Forum, which was held by Cooperation Jackson. And so Cooperation Jackson they have definitely just hopped on the regenerative economy train and are really starting to build anew. And so at that forum, we had the pleasure of hearing from Kali Akuno and other leaders of Cooperation Jackson on how they are creating a cooperative in the city of Jackson, and kind of what the organizing model is and what is incorporated in their Jackson Kush plan and all of those things. So as Kellen said, you can find more information about Just Transition in the zine that we sent out in the email. The zine is from Movement Generation, and it's called From Banks and Tanks to a Regenerative Economy. And lastly, you can hear more about the work that Cooperation Jackson is doing, that we're really starting to build relationships with them. And Kali Akuno wrote a book called Jackson Rising that you can get. And Kellen loves that book. I'm sure that's what he's grabbing right now. Yeah, there it is. So you can hear more about kind of what we're thinking and who our partners are in this work. And yeah, that's really the avenue that we're taking with the Just Transition.
All right, thank you. That was a very thorough answer. Yeah, there's a lot going on there, so I think that was a great question. Is there anything else before we wrap up here? Anything else for our speakers? You can just pop on the audio if that's easier, or feel free to submit it in the chat window. Okay, looks like I think everyone's all set. Any closing comments, Andrea and Soma?
I think there actually might be one question from GM, which is to know which local representatives are aligned and supported by Neighbor to Neighbor. And yeah, so I can just answer a little bit of that when it comes more to the overall state work. And a huge partner, well, I can think of 3 partners that not only support the work that Neighbor to Neighbor is doing, but are also really involved in just our mission for liberation and a just transition. And so our huge partners is Senator Jamie Eldridge, who is a huge voice when it comes to climate change and environmental injustice. Senator Pat Jalen, and Senator Sonia Chang Diaz, who is actually the sponsor of our Solar Access for All bill.
Here in Springfield, we have our city councilor, Adam Gomez, who is also running for state rep. Just got his signatures in, so he's on the ballot for September. In Holyoke, and I'll speak for the organizer there, we have Nelson Roman, who is doing excellent work, backs us up, believes in our values and our mission, and it shows in the city that he represents, in the area that he represents. So those like are our two heavy hitters for Neighbor to Neighbor here in Western Mass.
Thank you. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can now.
Okay, great. Okay, good. I think this is really amazing that you guys are using this technology here to get people together. Yeah, okay, so Sonia Chang Diaz represents Springfield, is that right?
No, she actually represents Suffolk County, so the Roxbury area. Yeah, she's in Boston.
Right. Okay, great. All right, thank you so much.
Yep.
All right. Well, the one last question, Angela, maybe you could do a quick breakdown. It's kind of an organizational structure question from Jim Wallace. Is basically how many folks are working on this program, which, you know, I think that's a kind of a variable number depending on the campaign. So maybe you could just explain the organizational structure for like our environmental justice work.
Yes. So really all of us at Neighbor to Neighbor are working on it because again, we are thinking of our campaigns in a very intersectional way. But as for like the nitty gritty policy work and all of that, it's me along with the folks that are working on the very specific environmental justice work. So as Zuma was talking about with the Harena School, Jackie Velez is taking up the pipeline issue that I mentioned earlier. And yeah, so it's really all of us that are either doing the specific each year climate change work, and all of us are like thinking about how to make the movement more intersectional so that we can not only like fight environmental justice, because we know that's only one avenue to our liberation, but how we can how we can fight everything towards that end goal.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Andrea. Yeah, just to echo that, we all work on a little bit of everything together. We really are a horizontal type of organization, which I personally love because as development director, even I get to help out with some of these other things. So yeah, thank you everyone for participating, and thank you all so much for joining us and dealing with some of the little technical issues. Just to give you an idea, this we hope this to be the first of many discussions and webinars that we have on a variety of issues. Keep an eye out for the next one. We're hoping to do something in the fall for electoral season to give you insight into our movement politics platform and a lot of the work we have upcoming for election season. A lot of that work starting now or yesterday. So hopefully you all can join us. And again, we'll post a recording of this online, so feel free to refer back to it. And yeah, for future webinars, have anyone else in your network who would be interested, please invite them and share it with them and see if they'd like to join. Thank you again. And Swilman and Andrea, if you want to say anything else before signing off, feel free.
You want to go first?
You can go ahead, Numa.
Of course. So I definitely want to thank you all for coming on here. This is a new way for us to really be in contact with you all and really make it personal. And so I'm really excited about this new method of corresponding with you. And so I just want to say that, you know, without your help or your support, we can't do what we do. Our work is so important and vital, and we're here at the grassroots level, so we know firsthand what it's like and the disparities and the real issues that are really facing the communities. And together, we build power so that we are working toward the new world that we want to really live in. And so I just want to thank you all for giving us the opportunity, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Yeah,
Yes.
echoing Zuma and Kellen. Thank you all for being on this webinar with us and hearing how Neighbor to Neighbor is engaging in the environmental justice work at the local level and at the state level. And yeah, I can post my email if folks want to get in contact with me to talk more. Nope, just kidding. Kellen already did it. Thank you, Kellen. So Kelly just posted all of our emails in the chat for folks who want to learn more or do a deeper dive or want to ask further questions. You are all free to email us.
Yeah.
All right. Again, thank you, everyone. Have a great day and enjoy the weather. Bye.
Bye.
Thank